state universities became a thing, and student loan financing became a thing, so that more and more people went to college, but also oftentimes we're accruing a lot of student debt, and then as a
Right.
result of that bubble, tuitions went way up.
Mhm.
And so there are a lot of United States citizens who are benefited greatly from that because they're, literate and, at least semi-educated. But also in many cases, United States citizens are very resentful towards academia as a result of that, because there was a sort of false promise of job security or job promise and
Right.
all of this stuff. So people are a lot of people are really skeptical of academia as a result of that. I don't know if you have any analogs for that in Russia, any skepticism towards academic learning or anything like that.
There's skepticism of a different kind, but the system is completely different, and the frustrations are very different. It's sort of the opposite because higher education is public, free. I mean, you can. So there's like you do need to pass. You pass a test when you finish school, sort of like GD, whatever acronym you have, GDE.
Yeah, GED, General
GED, yeah.
Education Diploma, or something like that.
So you get that, you get a score after you finish high school, and then that score allows you to, if it's high enough, allows you to enter a really good university. If it's a little lower, then a shittier one, and so forth. And so if you study, you can get somewhere. You could get into some university, maybe not the best one, but into some university for free. And moreover, for men, this is something you really want to do, because if you don't, then you may be drafted into the army because the service is mandatory. And so that with girls, there's not that kind of direct threat that you try to avoid by going to the school, but there's pressure from their families, from the society. You need to go get an education. So a lot of people, when they're 18 or 17, they go into university with, like, I was that person for sure. I had no idea what I want to learn, whether I want to learn, what I want to do with my life. I was completely clueless on all of that. And I went into an engineering school because that was the closest one to home and it was considered good. I had nothing to do with me. I didn't learn anything in that university because I didn't want to. And I think there's a ton of people like that in Russia. And so the percentage of educated people, is like people with higher education, is very high. But in many cases, that education isn't worth anything because, I wasn't trying to learn, so I didn't learn anything. I do have this diploma that says that I can make integrated circuits, but I can't. I've never done that in my life, and my diploma was fake. Like if I was offended sort of at the situation, because if the thing that I claimed to have invented in my diploma actually existed, that would be like a breakthrough little thing. Like I should have gotten a lot of respect for it. I only got a B, but it was all fake. That thing that I claimed to have invented, it didn't exist. We made up the numbers and and that's what a lot of people do. And so it's like, it's a different kind of situation with higher education. But in any case, I mean, the American thing really, really has been, and I think, is still confusing to me with the loans. I dated an American girl at one point, and she decided to get, like, she had a bachelor's from years ago, and she decided to continue the education and took out a loan for that. And I couldn't wrap my mind around the decision because it seemed so weird. Like, you don't have steady income. You're not, like, how are you going to pay this debt back? Why is it so important? I couldn't understand the connection, like this promise, well, there's going to be this high education that I have, so that will get me a job. That to me didn't make sense. Why would it, how can you be certain of that? And so through a personal kind of relationship, I tried to figure out this broader issue because I knew her case was not like the reason she was acting that way is because the culture was acting that way. A lot of people of her age were doing the same thing and thought it made sense. And I couldn't figure out how exactly that makes sense. So when you find yourself as, that friend of mine, let's say you're 30 something and you have this huge loan that you have to pay back, there's no way to really do that. So it kind of becomes additional tax on your salary that you're going to be paying for the rest of your life. That whole system is fucking weird.
It is. And I've heard people say it's the American way. And it kind of, in a certain sense, that's actually true. Like, we started our country like by the seat of our pants on loans from France. Like, it's kind of a trip. But
Mm-hmm.
I would say, it's an interesting situation because I see it differently than a lot of people see it because I actually value my education. Like, I did not have the same experience as you.
Right.
I knew I wanted a liberal arts education, but I didn't know what that was.
Mm-hmm.
Coming from a blue collar town, my dad's an auto guy, my mom's a paralegal. I didn't know what a liberal arts education was, but I knew I wanted it. I knew I wanted to go to the place where you read the books. You know what I mean?
So you wanted
And
something different from what was like immediately offered.
yeah, and it wasn't even that I wanted a different life job wise or anything, though. I mean, I did probably want to leave my hometown, but I knew I wanted to study. I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
study the things that were in that library, and so now, I have a master's in English now, and I very much value my education. And you're right, like my student loans are an additional tax on my income. Um, a lot of people justify it because of statistical averages. You're statistically more likely to have a better income, and that actually plays out. Most of the time, it plays out. But
Right.
that doesn't mean it's easy, and it doesn't mean that you spend your time doing what you want to do. A lot of people spin their wheels in jobs that they don't like. You know,
Yeah. I
uh,
mean, for me, it's just the idea of a loan is so fucking scary. Like people of my generation have taken them out. Like I think mostly women are like more practically minded and get, I know these young women who have apartments in Moscow or St. Petersburg because they took out a loan, they worked for it, they had this plan. It's very expensive. To me, that was never really an option. I never thought about it because I was so like, it chains you, right? I can't quit my job if I have to pay this loan out every month.
yeah, you have to be more cavalier about it. You have to be more like, let them come after me. Like if I and that's I think that's
I've
really
met
a
some
thing. Like,
Americans who left America and went to Russia because they had,
yeah,
or that was part of the reasoning because they
yeah,
had these people who wanted money from them, and they said, you know what, fuck off. I'm in a different country. What are you gonna do?
yeah. We
That's
have
an
such a
option.
dude. We have such a. It's so weird. Like, part of the reason I'm so frustrated by the Democrats is that they think that we have these like legitimate institutions. We don't.
Mm-hmm.
Our country is such a loose assemblage of radical perspectives that, like, that's a big tangent that I just went on, but I really think that there's something to it. Like, I don't think that our institutions have as much merit as some people seem to want to think. They're not as grounding, they're not as sustaining. We're a really loosely grouped assemblage of wild people, I don't know, a disparate
That is
mass.
really interesting. I've been going through this, like in my understanding of America throughout the last, I don't know, a dozen of years. I've uh like at the early stages when I was just learning what America is, even when I went to America and spent some time there, though at that point less than in the beginning, I totally bought this idea of a working system and here's how it works and here's the checks and balances and the free press and this and that and it all because I was learning. I really like the first introduction into the American kind of what America is politically and socially to me was the Daily Show. And this was not like I was watching it because had no, I didn't know who the Democrats are, who the Republicans are. I remember like watching this with my friends because it was interesting and funny and like
Yeah, and he's a
different.
guy in a good set with a suit. You know, he seems like he's got it together. You know.
Well, it was, so for us it was this like exotic, weird kind of thing. Like it was good comedy for me when I was 17, and I was learning about what America was from it. And it was this, it was just this kind of like almost like people pick up a foreign language or something that becomes your hobby. You're just curious about what this is. I had no stake in the game. I didn't care about the one side or the other, and it was just interesting to learn that, okay, so the way it works there is they have these two sides. For some reason it's like abortion and taxes are the big things. That's how they, like, that was all just funny and weird to learn.
And
But I
this
did buy the this like civic idealist view of America, and and also on contrast with Russia. Like it was, everybody in Russia knows the system is all kinds of fucked up, and there's none of this like idealism towards the system that we live in. And so the idea that there's a place where things do make sense and work is you kind of just agree with it because you don't know how the world is. You know your place is fucked up, and they say that there are these places where things work. And if you do visit or you watch a TV show or whatever, it does seem like you guys have you live better. Your country didn't fall apart. Not most of your country is like below the poverty line, etc. And so uh, I bought in this ideal, and then as I learn more and more, and I have more experience with America, I'm starting to question. I definitely, the system as it is now doesn't seem to make any sense to me. Doesn't seem like it's this working thing. Like it may survive or it may not. It depends on chance and people involved. And
let me
but I
tell you
don't have
something.
any like trust in this is gonna work because it's very thought out.
Let me tell you something. And because I hear so many people on the quote unquote left like knocking capitalism or whatever. But let me tell you something. My town last week got hit by a sort of Midwestern hurricane, 100-mile-an-hour winds,
Okay.
blew a stoplight over, tore the stoplight out of the concrete, knocked it over. 100-mile-an-hour winds. Part of the city of Cedar Rapids was out of power for a week. I was out of power for half a day. I was out of internet for a day and a half. Now I've got internet working because it's that market. The company's got to get that internet up because its paying customers are complaining,
Mhm.
and it gets it up. And that's what America is. It's like a bunch of mercantile people providing goods and services to people at the cheapest price possible. That's what it is. And you get all of this punditocracy making this big media storm about all of these like supposedly ideological differences, but that's not it, man. People are just like just the basic stuff that people have. They have families, they want to eat, they're afraid for the future. They,
Right.
all of the basic human survival shit. Bob is really amazing. Robert Wright is really amazing at getting at this materialist stuff. He's got a very interesting type of evolutionary minded Marxism, very, very soft. Like it's not a soft, but it's a quiet Marxism.
It's
Got it.
interesting you mentioned
Yeah.
Marxism. I've always felt that there's a quality to his thinking. Like in it, it looks at this like material level. Like everything is, I guess they would call, no, that's not the right term. I was about to say superstructure, but that's not the correct well of describing him. But he is skeptical about the explanations for that we get for how things how and why
Yeah.
things happen because they are ideological. It's a narrative that we create, and he likes to look at the economic kind of reality at the foundational level or psychological reality too. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's this idea in the United States that it's like these pious people arrived in this new world and finally there was a nation, like a true Israel, like and you see it in the names of some of these Pennsylvania towns, like Bethlehem and shit like that,
Uh-huh,
like
uh-huh.
um, Salem, Massachusetts, like Jerusalem, these there's this mythology, and this guy, this President Reagan, really crystallized it into this. He also took the actor popular culture thing and it made this.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about how you almost blow your top when you hear fellow Russians talking about the metaphysical Russia. But there is a metaphysical America where
Yeah,
people think that the Constitution finally, there was a document that humans were able to make. And you hear it like a Jewish guy, Ben Shapiro, saying this. It's like this divinely
right.
inspired document that is
The
truly
sacred thing.
egalitarian,
Yeah.
truly egalitarian. And that's no. There were a lot of, and that's one thing about the 1619 project that actually, whereas they may be inaccurate in the way that they represent the role of slavery in the founding of the country, they're very good about recognizing what you described, that there are material forces, that it's not
Mm-hmm.
just the ideological mythology. Like, I understand why we need the mythology. We need mythologies, or we seem to need mythologies. I don't know whether we actually need them or not, but I
It's
wouldn't. Do
interesting.
you
You
think that we need mythologies?
I do. I mean, I want a mythology. I'm developing my own mythology. I know, consciously I'm trying to have a world of symbols and myths and stories to interact with. It makes more sense to me than not that it makes more sense to me, but it appeals to me more. It's more of a my thing. I think just my way of thinking. I like mythological, symbolic. Um, uh, way of looking at things than, let's say, what Bob's more straightforward, rational, materialistic kind of view. And I think that's just personal preference. I think just people are better at different kinds of languages, at different ways of looking at things. And I'm more of this kind of person. He's more of that kind of person. We need different languages. It's very important, I think, to try to learn different kinds of languages like that, so that you can understand what the other person means. Um, and um, and we do have, like, I'm trying to create my own mythology. It's a very slow process of just putting my own world together out of the bits and pieces that I like, or that appeal to me, or that I um, can come up with myself. um, but people will, like, groups of people will develop their own mythologies, whether you want them or not, whether you think it's good or bad. That's gonna be a part of how things are. And we see now this whole slew of sort of some of them new, some of them are revamped, old ideas that are popping up, like the flat earth, the different conspiracy theories, uh, all the way to the lizard people, and to ancient aliens, and all of that. And I think those are mythologies that, if you have a vacuum, something is going to fill it. If you don't have good mythologies, not necessarily bad ones will appear. I'm not even knocking the flat earth. I'm just saying that you're not going to not have something like that. You're not going to have a vacuum.
I think that's really what Trump is, and it drives a lot of people crazy because they haven't offered an alternative.
Right.
He is like, I'm an American entrepreneur. I look at market forces and I make realistic deals. I push through and I make an argument for the case as I see it and get the deal that I think we deserve. There are a lot of people that are very grateful to hear somebody talk like that. And, the other side just doesn't have anybody like that. They want to tie all of these disparate identity groups together
Mm-hmm.
and have it come through they want justice to be the thing but okay, so you need to have somebody who's making deals in terms of justice. And it may be that Kamala Harris was a brilliant pick for that respect. A lot of people hate her because she was such such a vicious um, attorney. What's the prosecutor? Such a
Hmm.
vicious prosecutor against people, and we've changed our mindset about marijuana in the last decade.
Right.
Our country used to be very anti-marijuana, and now it's very pro-marijuana. And she was a vicious prosecutor and did a lot of things to the Black community that people think were not good. But on the other hand, she's a vicious prosecutor who can give voice to this idea of justice. And we'll see. I don't know. I don't have any faith that that duo can combat Trump at this point when I look at the ads and when I,
So you're
but I might
sure
be wrong.
Trump is gonna win?
I'm, if I were going to bet $100 right now, I'd bet on Trump.
Interesting. About a month or two ago, I think I was kind of walking around thinking I should find myself an American to bet, to have a monetary bet about the election. I would put my bet on Trump as well, but I'm not so sure anymore, and I don't know if it. You know what? For me, I think it's just at some point uh I did give in to the kind of looking at 2020 as this weird fucking year that I'm gonna stop trying to predict the future. Not that I was big on that anyway, but with COVID, and then the way different countries reacted, the way America reacted to COVID, the protests that are started happening in America. I know the election is coming up soon. Meanwhile, here, Belarus is, I don't know what's going to happen there. Like, it looked for a few days, it looked to me that Lukashenko has no chance really of staying in power. Now it's sort of starting to look to me that he may stay for a long time, but well, I don't know. So anyway, all that shit's happening. We just recently, Navalny got poisoned, it seemed, and he was just, Putin's main opponent. Is in a coma right now in Germany, and he was in a coma for a couple of days in Siberia, and they were trying to get him out to a hospital that they can trust, because to be in Russia in a state hospital when your suspicion is the state is the one who poisoned you, trying to kill you, that's not that didn't seem to them very um, promising. So they finally got him out, and he's in Germany now, and we don't know if he's going to live or not. We don't know if what's going to happen there. And so to me, at some point, this like threshold of pieces that I could look at and try to make a prediction of how it's going to go, it has become too much, and I'm just watching. I think now, I'm not feeling. I don't feel that I can participate in any way in these big things anymore, because they're happening too quickly. I can't make my mind about them, and the situation changes before I come up with like my approach to it. And so these big social political realities, now I'm just kind of watching them, not knowing how it's gonna turn out.
Yeah, man. I don't know. I mean, it's like I'm prepared for surprise, but I also just like feel in my gut that Trump is going to win. I've just felt like that for
And
about
what
6
happens
years.
if he wins? The thing
Uh,
just continues, or is it
Democrats take
a huge disruptive thing that
Democrats take the Senate, and there's a balance of power, and the Congress is just gridlocked for 4 more years. That's no big deal. It was gridlocked during the Obama administration too.
okay.
That's how our system works. It gridlocks. It's designed
So
for it.
it's designed to gridlock.
It's designed to gridlock so you can't have too sweeping of a legislation during
Right,
any
makes sense.
given
Yeah.
presidency.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I don't know how. To me, it's just become coming back to the mythologist. I guess part of the reason I'm trying to look for mythologists and to come up with my own kind of way of looking at things is because the conventional way just isn't really working for me. Like, I can't use it. I can't follow the story. Like, let's say if we're looking at America, uh, I can't get into the competition between the Democrats and the Republicans and accept the narrative that's like the default kind of mainstream, like the Jon Stewart narrative, like the thing that I learned when I was learning about what America is from Jon Stewart and people like that. I can't use their language anymore because it's not giving me a convincing story that I can follow or interact with. I now, if I was to try to understand what's going to happen in America or the world with these big dynamics, the pandemic or the overthrowing of the um, governments in different parts, or the clashes that are happening in America, for me to try to make sense of all of that, I need a new language. I need to be thinking about Pepe the Frog. I need to be thinking about Kek, the god of chaos. I need to be thinking about UFO theories or something, some kind of absurdist, symbolic narrative about all of this. I need to be thinking about, I don't know, people as expressions of ideas, watching Trump as, like, one example is Gary Lackman said in a conversation I had with him that he kind of viewed Trump as the TV reality that represented world in television popping into our usual reality, because we put so much reality into television because the reality shows and the reality shows about people watching reality shows, so much of this human attention and the realistic approach to things was put into the TV box that something was going to pop out. And that is one way of looking at Trump, like that kind of way. I'm not saying like I agree or disagree even with that idea, but that way of speaking about the situation, this gives me hope that I can use it to say something meaningful or to learn something meaningful or maybe predict what's going to happen or, engage with it in some meaningful way. While every once in a while, I do go to the homepage of the New York Times, and I don't know why I'm doing that. I think, I mean, I do have like the most recently when shit was going down in Belarus, it's still going down, but it was this big thing, totally unprecedented in the last 30 years. Nothing like that happened. And then the previous 70 years was the Soviet Union. So it was a completely new, huge situation that we all paid attention to. And I was curious what this, like, I do have this vision from somewhere, from PR or something, of the New York Times as this like very, like, this is how journalism is supposed to be, like they're upholding this journalism, and I go there and it's never been that. Anytime that I've watched, maybe was that 50 years ago, I don't really know, but it's definitely, I don't get that now. But now that I went to the New York Times homepage to see what Americans are saying about how the American media is looking at the Belarus situation, and I had to scroll like 12 screens to see a mention of it, and I had to scroll through. Some headline was something like, these Native American women are reshaping the face of science fiction or something like that. And it's interesting to me. I would, if I was like in the arts and entertainment section of a popular magazine and there's like, hey, there's interesting shit happening in science fiction, there are these several women, Native American women who are changing, that would make sense. But how that takes precedent before the possible overthrow of a government in Belarus, to me was weird. But why am I saying all of that? I'm looking at this homepage of the New York Times and I can't use any of it. I can't read an article to get an understanding of the situation that I actually am going to use in my own thinking down the road. So for that, I need to go to these weirder places with stories and absurdist or psychedelic ideas or something of that kind.
Two things. One, yeah, that's interesting about the New York Times. I canceled my subscription the day after Trump was elected because I was like, you're not fucking reporting anything.
Right.
And I started noticing after Trump was elected that every single headline was an editorial statement.
Oh, absolutely. The news are a horrible person we don't really like. He's doing this. Like, you can't put that in a fucking headline.
Destroying democracy and
yeah,
everything. Boogeyman. And then, but the thing about that is, Remember what I said? America is mercantile, man.
Right.
They've got bigger subscribership than they've had in a long time.
Mm.
They're getting more people to subscribe digitally
Mm-hmm.
than ever before, and they were really hurting. 15 years ago, the New York Times almost folded at one point.
Mm-hmm.
So the old model wasn't working. This model is working.
That's
So they're
interesting.
going to keep doing it. I'm not going to give them money. I still do look at their headlines. I look at their front page just about every day. But anyway, so that's first point. Second point, have you thought about materialism as far as mythology goes? I've actually been turning more towards material. I thought it was interesting what you said, different languages, there's these different. I've noticed that scientists, quote unquote, have just such a different way of talking about and looking at reality because they're so used to reducing things to
Right.
experimental conditions that they just, to talk to a scientist about why their attitude towards religion isn't getting the picture. They don't understand because they're just like, obviously religion is bullshit. But that's not the
Well, not
way
every
they
scientist is like
not
that.
every scientist, but many seem to be in that vein. And that's changed. I mean, I do, you're right, Nikita. I see too many of the scientists who are making side careers as media people.
Right. There
Um,
is there is a difference between
I
a
think
scientist and
many
a
practicing scientists go to church, you know.
yeah.
They're just not in the fucking media, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I do think that there's a anyway. The only reason I brought up materialism is because I think it's interesting. Robert Wright seems to be one of these materialists who's also not given up on spiritual pursuit. I think John Horgan to some extent also. And what's interesting is material world. I mean, you saw it when Robert Wright interviewed the fellow from the philosophy professor. I'm blanking on his name, but they talked about physicalism. Uh,
Gideon Rose? Oh, no,
yeah,
that was
Gideon
different one.
Rosen. That's exactly
Oh,
who
it
it
was
was.
it? Okay.
Materialism is very weird. Like if you actually go full materialist, reality is not any less weird.
Right.
I mean, once you start to get to whether it's a physicist talking about quantum or whether you're talking about information being conveyed by DNA and chemistry, all of that stuff is very weird. So I think it's a perfectly functional mythology, materialism.
I think it has kind of an underdeveloped um I guess language, like a kind of language that it still needs to develop.
You think in
It's
100
been on my
years it'll
mind
have it though?
because well, it depends. It
Yeah.
depends on what we do. We
Sean
can
Carroll
make it.
seems to be headed in that direction, I think.
Maybe, I don't know. I've heard just a few interviews of him, but I don't know about his project. But what you're saying has been on my mind recently. I have this idea that I haven't figured out fully yet, but you helped with a transcript of a John Horgan's interview with what was his name, Goff, panpsychist,
Yeah. And I kind of
and
started to get into panpsychism after that, after doing that. Anyway,
it's
but I
it's
digress.
it's an interesting, it's definitely an interesting thing to think about for me. I'm not understanding again. I feel like many of
I think
these.
it's totally legit to say that a molecule is conscious. It reacts to things. It's sentient. It responds to its environment.
I'm fine with it, absolutely. Like I have this, like, I'm not buying into any, like, I'm not gonna take any way of looking at the world, any given way of looking at the world as and just adopt it as the way. But
Yeah,
I like entertaining
absolutely.
different ones, and this
Well,
one makes perfect sense to me.
Goff was interesting because Goff said, "Look, I just think it's the most promising view that I've been able to
Right,
find empirically."
right, right. But so what I was getting at is this working with this interview is a part of a bigger kind of project that I'm trying to figure out now, which is is doing, I guess, what I said is lacking. There are these scientific findings, ideas, way of looking at things, theories that are supposed to describe reality, right? It describes reality at this fundamental level. But there's no bridge between that and Trump or like quantum physics. You're studying, you're trying to figure out what the world is, but you can't use that those things that you, or not that you can't, but people don't. There's not a developed language yet to apply what you learn about the reality, what the world is, to your politics, to your relationship to your society, to the practical dimension of life.
I think it has to do with um, analogic or metaphorical symbolical language, which is used in daily conversation, and
Mm-hmm.
mathematics. I think that in a sort of pure scientific idea, the pure expression of true reality would be in mathematics.
Mm-hmm.
That's not how people talk, man.
I think I may be wrong about this, but I think if you look at people like Newton, let's say, scientists or what would you call them, like pre-scientists? I don't know where you make the mark, but like let's say alchemists who were developing real chemistry, like that's the foundation of our chemistry.
But they
But
were
I
still
think
using
those
old
people
language.
were also very mystical, and I think part of, like, if you look at how they describe these um, experiments they were making, they, I think, were trying to speak at the same time about this very concrete physical experiment in the physical retort with particular substances, and yet also speak metaphorically about the reality of the mind or the soul. Right? Again, I may be wrong about all of this because I'm not educated enough, but this is my perception of that kind of project. And we still have, like, even in our language, we still have remnants of that. Like, you can say that you can use mercurial as a description of what a quality of a person or thought or something. That comes from Mercury, because Mercury was considered the physical element, Mercury, which mirrors everything and behaves in this weird way. Somehow, to these alchemists, was tied to the soul or the mind. And so they were making these physical experiments with Mercury in the background, or maybe in the foreground of their mind, holding that they're trying to figure something out about the human soul and how these processes in the mind are working, which, again, if we look at panpsychism, that would be a totally reasonable way to go about things. If you think that physical elements are conscious, then when you study how they behave in a lab, you should be learning something about how consciousness behaves.
Yeah, and to add one more interesting dimension to what you described about the alchemists, so I'm glad you brought up Mercury. So the other interesting component of that is that they chose to call the element Mercury
Right,
because it's a Greco-Roman god,
right.
right? And so the idea of science in the alchemical era had to do with looking back towards ancient things,
Mm-hmm.
things that weren't European, but were Proto-European, but
Right.
Greco-Roman culture. There was this whole idea in the Renaissance, and alchemy was like just as we were beginning to enter the Renaissance, but this idea of looking at ancient studies because it had all been kind of bleached out, and we needed to bring the ancients back to be able to look forward. That's fascinating. And
My
can I
my
say
favorite,
something? Oh,
yeah,
go ahead.
sure.
No, go ahead. Your favorite.
My favorite little, like, bit of information that I try to hold in my mind, that is difficult at times, is this juxtaposition between the way, well, there are two things. One, I remember I went to Italy and I went to Rome, and I was looking at all these ancient, the Colosseum and all of these things, and they're, to
Yeah,
me,
I've been.
they were way more interesting than what is actually happening in Italy right now. like the actual city of Rome as it exists now.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And the guide told us something that stuck with me. She was talking about, I guess, Michelangelo, and said that, pointing at some of the ruins that are now have been uncovered from the dirt, the ground, the earth. She said, now you see like these columns in their entirety. When Michelangelo was walking around the city and looking at the same things, there were more of them were under the ground. And so the idea
fascinating.
of a person, so this is like, there are all of these people living in fucking Rome, like this is the city, right? And they are at the cutting edge of their civilization, these scientists and painters and the Renaissance people. And in the center of this city, you have the remnants of a previous civilization that looked more advanced than yours, right? So it's an analogous, like if we started to excavating something in the Red Square and we found a UFO type situation there, like how would you feel? Like what do you think about your place in reality and your society? And so you look at that and you try to back engineer that reality. This is actually interesting that I've never thought about. The UFO belief that is spreading now and gaining legitimacy via publications in the New York Times and statements by the Pentagon and stuff, and the Joe Rogan podcast. You can make a parallel here because they're talking about this like advanced technology, a fallen UFO or something that the scientists are trying to look at and back engineer this incredible technology. It's similar, like that story, that idea. It's similar to what the Renaissance people were doing with the Greco-Roman world, right? They had remnants of the civilization that they didn't know enough about, and they created this new European reality largely based on that. And the thing that I was getting to, my favorite bit, is that they got it wrong in some ways that are so obvious now. Like, have you seen these colored statues? When there's this exhibition that was, I guess, going around the world. I have never seen it in real life, but I've seen pictures of these statues where they try to use the pigments, the remnants of the pigments on the statue to recreate their original color.
Oh.
And you look at these, we got used to this idea that the Greco-Roman world is this white marble.
Yeah, white marble.
And it wasn't. It was really, really weird and colorful. And some of these statues, they reliably make me think about DMT. I'm looking at this like green, yellow, red, weird character that's a part of a, it's a god or something, or a hero in this mythological story. It makes me think about DMT. And so, and we built a completely different reality based on that.
I have to share this. So I'm so excited by what you're saying right now because, I'm, my personal ethics, I'm using, Neo-Stoicism for my personal ethics. It's a great system of ethics. Stoicism is an excellent system of ethics. But I'd been arguing with everybody because, Neo-Stoics, they don't like to have a god. They don't want anything like that. Well, the whole word stoic comes from the stoa, which is this porch, and it's from the stoa pecile. I probably pronounced incorrect. This painted porch, and this is this place where the Stoics would walk, and they would have conversations and debates and dialogues, dialectic, and all of that shit. From your description, that Stoa Pecile would have been trippy. It would have been trippy as fuck, right?
It could
now,
be.
So modern Stoics are like, oh, you just like, it's almost as though art doesn't exist. It's like art and religion don't exist when you talk to modern Stoics, and it drives me fucking bonkers because they supposedly are trying to think about human nature as it is. We're capable of reason and we're social. Yes, we're capable of reason and we're social. That's why a guy like John Horgan writes a book like Rational Mysticism, That's why we have aesthetics. uh, what's his name? Marcus Aurelius had an ancient. He had a ancestral shrine that he would burn
Mm-hmm.
incense to and pray to at night. We're
Mm-hmm.
humans. We're symbolical creatures. You have to use symbols. That's
Right.
what we are as people. But anyway, this whole idea that the modern Stoics are missing this whole trippy aspect is very exciting to me. So sorry for interrupting, but I got really ecstatic for a second.
Well, again, I do need to put these disclaimers that I don't know enough about any of this to
Yeah,
speak about it confidently. But some I definitely have seen some of these fucking sculptures that look trippy as fuck,
yeah.
and it makes sense to me. And I often wonder if, well, you tell me how you uh, perceive these ancient religions, like of the ancient Greece or Rome or Egypt. I think we do look at it mystically, but the way I learned about them when I was little is, and this may be a remnant of this like Soviet um, ideology, materialism way of looking at things. But I remember it was presented like a long time ago. People were observing these events that they couldn't explain, couldn't understand rationally, like the lightning in the sky, and they had to make up these stories. Now we know what lighting is, and so it was this condescending kind of way of looking. When people didn't know, they came up with these stories to talk about, to make sense of the world. And I have a strong suspicion that this is missing the point completely. I don't know. I'm not educated enough. B, when I do find like a popular writer, historian, most of them, I think, when they talk about the ancient Rome or ancient Greece, they still have this kind of like, you need to get to a meaning of certain parts of religious worldview. You kind of need to be religious yourself, or you need to have psychedelic experiences or something. You need to get access to that dimension they're trying to describe, that you're trying to relate to. And if you just don't have that, you've never done drugs, you've never meditated, you've never had any peak experience, and your natural disposition is the more of a like very rationalist, materialist kind of person, you're just not going to understand what people are talking about. And I think this happens a lot, especially when we're looking at these older cultures. We don't know, we've never experienced them. We kind of piece them together and we try to understand them through our eyes. And for us, it's the easiest way to look at these ancient gods, Mars and people like that, as a story. But there definitely are other ways of looking at the situation. One being, let's say you look at these gods as personified principles of the universe or the human world. You have a god of war. That's a way of talking about the reality that war is a part of what's going on here. My one way of relating to that uh, way of looking at things for me is just try to imagine a situation where you are a military commander standing on the top of a hill, looking at your army going to battle with a different army, and you're looking at all these people dying, and you believe that Mars is a real thing. There's a war of God, and you're a person who's doing war, and you're looking at the deaths occurring, and you know that there's like all of this is connected to you, for you to a deity, right? Something that's sacred in some way. It's a consciousness that is powerful, more powerful than you are, more powerful than any human. It's this force that can be represented as a person, but you're also looking at this force in action right now because you're seeing, hundreds of people killing each other below your feet, and you're the person, you're the reason they're there. You're the person who gave the command. And all the meanwhile, all of this is a part of this divine reality or higher reality or spiritual reality. if you try, if that's, I don't know if I did a good job of trying to, you know, make that language accessible. And I don't know if that is the language that, you know, that is, I kind of made up in my attempts to try to guess or you know, come up with another way of looking at these old stories from very advanced civilizations again. Um, I don't know if that was how they looked at things, but that's a way of looking at things. And that would be a powerful way of looking at things, I think.
A very powerful way to visualize and embody what it is that you need to
It's only got real quiet.
Oh yeah, sorry, I didn't have it turned up. To visualize and embody the aspiration that you're driving towards through this manifestation of this deity, incredibly empowering. I pulled this off my shelf, The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield.
Oh, I think I've read that.
He's an interesting guy because he prays to the muses before he writes every day. And that's how he's able to get his basic writing done every day. And here's this modern person totally using an ancient technique, pray to the muses, and that gets him in the mindset, and he's able to do his daily work. But anyway, I also wanted to say, you know, I think that this is where Jordan Peterson gets really short shrift in the popular media. Like, Peterson, I understand that he's a tool and that he's like a douche for how he got to prominence and everything. But like, he's also the only person that I know of who's an academic with credentials that's legitimately trying to understand what Homo sapiens are doing with these myths and religions.
I'm not even I'm just gonna say that I'm not gonna even blame him for any, like, I find it kind of weird that I think in almost every conversation that I'm a part of, when people bring up Jordan Peterson, they feel this, either they scoff at him, or if people do make, you know, do use some argument of his, or, you know, some idea of his that they find, or part of his experience, his story that is meaningful, important, or he got something right, they feel that they need to point out that they also think he's something, you know, bad about him. And I don't really understand why that is the case.
It might be a Russian American thing. I think we're all so hypersensitive with like cancel culture and everything. I think we're just like, in America right now, if you're not, you really need to posture yourself as being appropriately pro social justice. And if you don't, you're not doing your job. So we just, that's just where we're at. And that maybe there's not that same kind of social justice vibe in Russia. I'm not sure.
Oh, there's definitely not a whole lot of social justice in Russia. Justice vibe, but there is, you know, there is that vibe in certain circles that I think are not very
the pussy riot circles or whatever.
Well, those are kind of more interesting people, freer people than let's say like this liberal media that exists. It's not a big force in the country, in the society, you know, run by Putin and you know, his system. But they exist as I kind of look at them as a subculture, you know, and I don't have any problem with them. But that social justice, you know, vibes are there. It not only I don't have any problem with them, I applaud them in some ways. I'm not giving them any shit, but they're not the dominant, like their reality is not the dominant reality in Russia. And where am I getting with this? I think it used to be at least more accepted in public speech. And I think it's going to continue to be accepted, at least in private speech, to have opinions that are wrong or fucked up, or like you don't have to be right. You don't have your opinions are not so important for it to matter whether you're right or wrong, you know. So it's like I think there's a greater tolerance in Russia towards an opinion you disagree with or even find appalling. You know, like if I talk to somebody and I think his views are all kinds of fucked up and evil, I don't necessarily hold it against him. You know, so you have some fucked up views. It may put barriers between us, like for us to become close friends or something. But I'm not gonna be all scandalized about some guy having fucked up views. That, I mean, why would you expect everybody to have the right views or the views that you consider right?
Yeah, we kind of touched on this the last time we talked. There's some weird political identity thing going on in the
Right,
United
right.
States where it's like, and Bob's doing a lot of work trying to talk about cognitive empathy, because we just think like, if you have the wrong view, you're evil, period. And I need to say you're evil. If I don't, people are going to identify that I neglected to say that you were
Right.
evil. And it's we just don't have that nuance right now. Like if
Well,
like
I think it isn't it to me from the outside, it looks like there's a kind of a, I guess people call it the cultural war, right? But I think there's a battle for what America is. Of people feel like it's very important. It's their civic duty to try to make the definition of America what they think it's supposed to be. And there are competing views that if people feel hard and hard to be okay with. Like if your version of what America is completely incompatible with mine, we're gonna clash in this. But I think it comes from this like competitive nature of the democratic system and capitalism, and it's everything for Americans. It seems from the outside is this competition. That's how you figure out what reality is, or who's right, or who's going to go to jail, or who's a winner, who's a loser. It's this competitive thing. And so their views of what America is compete at this point, it seems like to death. Like the main thing, there's not a search for a synergy. Like here, I think America is this, you think America is that. I wonder if we can come up with a third way that would encompass both. Like that seems to be lacking completely.
yeah, and
And I
again
think
it goes
in
back.
Russia, it's not this like really hard competitive thing. I think because most people feel it doesn't fucking matter what I think Russia is or what you think Russia is. We're not ruling here. We're not making the Russian, like you'll have this view, I'll have that view, and it doesn't matter at the end of the day because neither you nor I have any power.
That's what so it goes. Yes, it's true about the philosophical thing with respect to knowledge, self-knowledge of
Mm-hmm.
your power, but it's also a market force thing.
Right,
And so it's like, how do you get people to the polls? You get people to the polls by convincing them that something's at stake.
right,
Because if nothing's at stake, why? And indeed, many Americans do not vote. Many Americans do not vote. So you get them to the polls by convincing them some evil is upon us, and if we don't
right,
get to the polls, we're fucked. So you mix that with the fact that media is not a publicly owned utility. Media is composed of a shit ton of private companies. So those private companies are going to do that. They're going to cater to those polarizing forces because that's how you get audience base. People aren't going to watch you if you're boring. It's just the way it is. People don't watch public television if they think it's boring. I don't,
right.
I personally love boring media. I'd been loving boring media since well before the podcast revolution.
What's
But
an example of boring media that you like?
NPR used to be boring. NPR
Mm.
didn't used to be. The day I stopped listening to NPR was when they canceled a show called Talk of the Nation. It was a morning show that was like an hour or two long, and it was just a guy, Neil Conan, and he'd Talk of the Nation. I'm Neil Conan. And he said bye bye when the caller got off the air, and it wasn't even a particularly long format show. It was still they
Too
still had
long.
to cut things short, but by today's cable news standards, it was a long form show. It's not long form in comparison to podcasts, but
Uh
the
huh.
day they canceled that show, I was like, fuck it. NPR's It was during, I think it was during Obama's second term, and I was like, they're in the bubble. They're in the Obama bubble. They're in this specific noosphere, or like
How is that
specific.
show connected to the bubble? Why the cancellation of that show means
That
they're in the
would be
bubble?
the kind of show where you'd have one guy from one side talking legitimately about something,
I see.
and yeah, and it was also the boring media aspect of it too. It was like, you guys aren't. It used to be your public radio. It's supposed to be like the
Mm-hmm,
fact that your tax dollar
mm-hmm.
supported had something to do with you being a public utility. It's not like that anymore. And I actually know somebody who's in public radio who said, when Trump was threatening to cut the funding, they were like, "Go ahead, cut the funding. We'll make it up somehow." And I'm like, "Well, you're not really public anymore, like."
Right, 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 right.
Um,
Interesting. I wanted to mention a thing to get back to. We were talking about this one way of looking of making sense or relating to an ancient worldview, a pagan worldview with gods of different parts of life, principles of life, right? And we don't have much of that now. But the reason I keep coming back to this Pepe the Frog morphing into Kek, the god of chaos thing, is because that is an example. Like, I don't have many more examples of that, but I think that is a very promising, um, what would you call it, creative project or something, finding these bridges. So what Kek, the god of chaos that looks like a frog in these internet memes, is somehow a connection to this ancient magical way of thinking. He is an internet meme. He is a thing that people laugh at. It's like a joke. It's like jokes travel, like the other memes travel. It's just something people share because they giggled. And it's a personification of Trump in some cases, right? So it has a very direct connection to the political reality. It's a way of looking at that political reality, because if you look at the president of your country as this living joke that has a connection to an ancient magical worldview that is all about shit posting and provocation and weird kind of irony where you can't figure out whether it's a joke or not anymore, who's being serious and who's not, whether a person posting this particular swastika is a neo-Nazi or a very ironical young man or whatever. It gets all confused. And Trump is a representation of that force. That's a way of relating to the political reality that to me is powerful. Let's say, I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I'm saying this kind of looking at things, this way of looking at things can, I think, get shit done or orient you in the political reality in such a way that you then can get shit done. If you look through this lens, as opposed to your old, the polls in Iowa say this, and here's how it's going to go. This like New York Times analysis or CNN analysis of how the election is going to go, let's say, or what it means that election went this way or that way.
yeah, I think you're right. Like, it can't just all be rational and analytical. People just don't respond to that. They need symbolical. And the closest
Right.
analog I can think of to Keck is Beyonce. And the reason is she's audiovisual. She does video albums where the choreography is as actually more important than the lyrics. It's like
uh-huh.
the set design, the costuming, and it's this whole African consciousness.
Right.
We are deep in Egypt, so you could put some biblical stuff on top of that, and it's like all of these people, BLM, all of these people together, it's like one thing, one kind of symbolical force.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because she's a person, she exists.
Right.
I think that might even be her birth name, and but that's not how it functions. It functions as like a comic book character. And I don't mean comic book like like Charlie Brown. I mean like graphic novel, like
Right.
mythosymbolical figure,
Right.
you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I would say Rogan is doing that with his life, uh,
Interesting.
right? Because he is also this, and he would say this himself. I'm a fucking comic book character. I'm, a
Yeah.
really muscular guy who does DMT. Is a, his whole career is such a weird combination of things, and he's a caricature of a man in some ways. Like you take these ideas of masculinity and you put them into this, like, again, a comic book character, like a very um, what would you call it? Overemphasized masculinity, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And he becomes, so that there's Joe Rogan the man. There's a person who has a family, who's talking to his children in the evening, who's has friends, who has private conversations on the phone and all of that. I don't have access to that person, though I get more of an access to that person than with your usual celebrity, because he's high talking on his show without filtering his words
Yeah.
very much
Yeah.
because
And
he's
you
too
see his
high.
mannerisms and his gestures
Yeah.
and all of that. Yeah.
And there are hours and hours and hours of these conversations. You can't control yourself for this many hours. But he's also like the entity that I do have access to is an image of Joe Rogan. Is this guy with a kettlebell and DMT and whatever, he's shooting arrows. He's
The first thing you hear when you log on is you hear him doing like a monkey sound.
right. And the UFOs are there. This whole thing is like mixed in there, and he's also a player, an agent in the political reality more than many people, right? If he says something on his show that may influence the situation, or if he has
Look,
a
man,
particular guest on the show.
maybe Trump has this professional wrestling deal, but Joe Rogan's the real thing, man. He's mixed martial arts, man.
So it's just very interesting. And what am I? There's this idea that I've been trying to get at that I can't express or understand fully myself, but I am trying to think about it. And it's the relationship between um, a person and the idea or ideas of a person.
Yeah.
And you can use Trump and Putin as case studies, and my, what would you call it, either intuition or a thing that I'm excited to explore, a proposition that is interesting to at least look at. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but I kind of want it to be right, I guess, on aesthetic grounds, is the idea that Putin the man, the actual person, is not a powerful entity, but these ideas of Putin are. And you can look at that situation, like if you try to imagine that again, like there is a guy who goes to bed at night and he closes his eyes and thoughts go through his head, and he takes a piss in the morning and brushes his teeth. Like there's a person who's going through the routine of life and has all the emotional trappings of being a human, has all the distractions that every human has. That guy just happened to be in that situation. He's in the fucking Kremlin for 20 years now. He's gonna do more of that, and he has less power over the situation than these images of him that he knows of, that he can kind of work with, play with, but it's them who are running the show more than he is.
Oh man, we have this thing in our country. Well, first off, you're making me think of the great and powerful Wizard of Oz.
Right. I
Don't
suppose
pay
so. Yeah.
attention to the man behind the curtain. Look at
Right.
the fucking media portrayal in
Right.
this magic screen above, which is an amazing. I mean, it's extraordinary how this children's author and this movie company MGM figured out this analog or this metaphor for American media
Right.
culture. Whether they were trying to do that or not, I don't know. But we have, that is our okay, Americans think that we're like these direct democracy people, but Woodrow Wilson was sick in bed and his wife was dealing with everything. His wife was basically
Mhm.
running the country. FDR, there's questions, at the end of his term, and they were going to put him in for a fourth term. Reagan was notoriously drunk a lot
Oh,
at the
really?
end of his presidency. Um, fucking same thing with Nixon. Uh, the Democratic Party nominated a fucking 80-year-old as their candidate. They nominated a skeleton. He's a figurehead. There's no other way to describe Joe Biden. It's a
Mm-hmm.
figurehead. He's
Mm-hmm.
not actual presidential material. They nominated him so that they could get a good VP pick so they can run things after he does his single term presidency. It's insane. I mean, but anyway, I just went on a big
Well,
rant, but apparently I've
why
been
is
kind
that
of stuffing
insane?
it.
Why is that? Why can't
Maybe
that
that's
be
just
a
how power
strategy?
works. Yeah, maybe it's just how power works. It's like the Pharaoh, man. You got to have the image of the divine king on the side of
Right.
the
Right.
buildings. People have to have their uh, divine royalty.
It's interesting, like these different ideas about power and how they're connected to history. And I'm thinking, I think I've mentioned this before, or I definitely mentioned it on my podcast in another conversation. This idea in Russia that Putin does not exist. It's this kind of I guess a meme would be an accurate way to describe it, but not meaning it is internet memes too, these pictures, but earlier than the internet, this appeared in the culture, and it's this idea that you hear from this guy here, from that guy there, and it's usually a joke, but every so often it's not a joke, and there are different versions of it, but the premise is that Putin is not real. And I think it can be viewed in so many different ways, all of them making a certain kind of sense. Like it can be this a commentary on this particular guy, Putin. We don't know enough about him. He's this like weird, mysterious character. It started. I remember one of the first kind of memes, these like viral pieces of formulation of feelings about Putin is when he became, I can't remember if he was elected then already or he was doing this interim term before his first election when Yeltsin left and he put Putin in charge. Um, but there was this some kind of a summit of Western countries, and one person formulated this question. He said, "We don't know who Mr. Putin is," and he said this in these like with pauses accentuating the words. He said, "Who is Mr. Putin?" And it became this kind of headline material, and it became like Russians laughed at it, and it made a ton of sense for us because we had no idea who the fuck Mr. Putin is. He's the president of our country, and we were just notified about it, and maybe it was right after the election, so then there's more, but we did know him anyway, and we still don't. Right? He's not like the Obama family where here are the kids, here's the dog, here's the wife, they talk, they dance, they have this uh, a version of here's Obama the person, Obama the human. He talk like a person, and again, you can say that's a fake personality or not, but you can get the feeling that you know who this guy is. And with Putin, he's always remained kind of ex-KGB, kind of a spy, doing these different, you know, projecting images of himself that were not like a personable, like you can relate. No, he's like in taiga, shirtless, saving a tiger, or diving deep into the water to find an ancient vase or something. It's all
Leading a flock of geese.
exactly cranes. Those were, yeah. And so it could be a description, this idea that Putin does not exist. It could be just a description of that reality. Like we don't know who the guy is. Uh, it could be a statement about power. Uh, metaphysically, you know, like at a deep level, like that's how power works. There is no Putin, there is no uh, demiurge or whatever. It's not, you know, we have an image of a person at the top, but it's not the real thing. It could be somewhere in between those two, where it's a description of power in Russia, like a political statement that it's the regime that's important, and Putin is a person who represents the regime. But if you take Putin out, there's going to be a new guy, and the system is going to continue. Which also would make sense for Russians, you know, to adopt that way of thinking at things, because when you start talking about Biden as the skeleton, you know, of a person, we had a period um, right before Gorbachev, right before the Perestroika, where we had like, and after Brezhnev, where we had like 3 or 4 people who, you know, the tzaka, the head committee of the party, were all of these old men, really fucking old men. And so when the next in the chain of command got power, he died in a few months. And then he was replaced by another guy who died in a few months. And then he was replaced by another guy who died in a few months. And that person and you could see them, and that's after Brezhnev, who already by the end of his term, he could barely fucking talk. So if you have, it's very hard to think of that person as a powerful person, like this is the leader of our country, when you can see he can barely talk, he doesn't know what's going on. They with Chernenko, they would prop him up, like I think by the end of his stay, we didn't know that, the people of the Soviet Union didn't know that, but you don't need to know the details to still get the reality of the situation. And the situation was that he basically stayed in his bedroom, and next to the bedroom, they created this kind of a fake office, like as if he's working here. And he would do, you know, they would record him making some statement, or like there's an old man who can't function, and every so often you have to pick him up kind of and put him in front of the camera and help him to get through the shoot. And then he goes back. Who's running the country? It's not that person. Nobody had any illusion about that person running the country. And so then you try to think of, well, who does run the country? And in line with the official Soviet ideology, Marxism, you know, you can come up with like it's a class, or here's how the system works. It's a less it's less focused on the person than at the structural forces at work, right? And so that can be another way of interpreting this. There is no Putin meme. You know, it's not about him. It's never about the guy. It's about the system that he represents, or maybe it doesn't even represent. Whatever, you can go to different levels of that. But that, I guess, is another. So I have these like little pieces of what can be a worldview, I think, or a language, or a comic book. I don't know. You know, like a way of looking at the situation, where you have Kek here, and that's one part of how you relate to the Trump reality. And there is no Putin as one of the elements of how you can relate to power in Russia. And so that's kind of like one of the projects that I'm working on, just by living and thinking about shit, trying to come up with a language like that would be just interesting, playful, weird, but also meaningful, and would get you further in understanding the situation, or describing the situation in a more full way than you know, our tired old languages.
Yeah, I think there's a sort of arca persona. You know, it's like you were saying, the identity of the figure versus the identity of the like specific historical Homo sapien.
Right.
It's so interesting. Like, I just kept thinking a lot about Obama while I was hearing you talk, because it's like I recently watched For anybody who doesn't watch Blogging Heads, there are these two Black academics, John McWhorter and Glenn Lowry. They call themselves the Black guys of Blogging Heads, so I feel okay describing them that way. I watched them in 2008 when the Democratic primaries were still going on, before Barack Obama had gotten the nomination, and it was head to head between Obama and Hillary Clinton for the Democratic nominee. And Glenn Lowry was supporting Hillary Clinton and John McWhorter was supporting Barack Obama. And Glenn was saying, you know, I keep hearing people talk to me, say, you know, we've talked to Obama behind the scenes, and he's playing it as he's a centrist, but he's really very progressive. And Lowry said, okay, if he's really progressive and he really has this ideology that he's not espousing on the stump, I would kind of like to know what that ideology consists of policy-wise, and it's a legitimate question.
Right.
So fast forward, it's Obama running for his second term against Mitt Romney. I have a friend in Kansas City, Missouri, who's a leftist, kind of a progressive, kind of Naderite, kind of green leftist, and he's going to vote for Jill Stein instead of Barack Obama. And you kind of press him on why, and he says, Barack Obama is the best Republican president we've had since Eisenhower, saying Obama's not left at all. He's not really progressive. He's actually a Republican in Democrats' clothing. Then I'm on a bus before Trump. It's like a year before the Trump election. I'm on a bus in Texas going from Tulsa to I think I'm going to Dallas. I'm going to end up in Austin, Texas. I can't remember where my bus was going to end first. But there's this young Black man, about 26, 28, just got out of prison. He's taking a bus back to his hometown, talking about Obama. And he said, he did more for the gays than he did for us. You know, like saying Obama's not a Black candidate, not really Black. Then you see Ta-Nehisi Coates. After Hillary loses the election to Trump, Ta-Nehisi Coates publishes his Obama-era essays. And the title of his collection of essays is, We Were 8 Years in Power, meaning us, Black people. We were in power for 8 years. He's giving the opposite identification of Blackness with Obama than this young man just out of prison was. Big persona, hard to pin down. Obama just gives the nomination for Biden, and he's standing in front of the Constitution. You know, we the people. You know, he's got this iconography behind him. I represent the United States, the Constitution, the history. Right. You know, is he a traditionalist? Is he a progressive? Is he left? Is he right? Is he Black? Is he white? Who knows? But he's Obama, and everybody thinks they know who he is. They understand the cadence of his voice. They hear him. They know him when they see him. But can you define who he is? Nope.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to think what the people themselves, I mean, the Obama in this case, Putin in his case, Trump, and what their view of the game is, of what their relationship to their persona is. You know, they probably understand it better than we do, looking at it from the outside, right? If you're the main player, you kind of know what the game is better than somebody trying to figure it out from the outside, maybe. Or I mean, maybe in some cases you get two. That's kind of like, that's one way of looking at things. You know, I've done some of these some of the interviews I've done on my show is with Tony Ortega about Scientology, and there's an interesting question about Hubbard there, because it's easy to look at him as a con man, because his whole fucking thing is so, I mean, it's hacky. You can see the dynamics at work, like how it's designed to trick people and get money from people. It's very obviously
slick.
Yeah, but well, Tony's description of it, and I think he gets it from you know, he has all of this information at his fingertips about how the Scientology was from the inside, from interviews with the son of Hubbard and so forth. It looks like he bought into his own con at some point, at least. Maybe there was always kind of two realities going. Are you trying to say something with your face?
No, I'm just with you. I'm just with
Oh,
you.
okay, okay,
I
yeah.
see this happen with all sorts of people and phenomena.
Right. So I don't really know how how his story really went. Whether there's always been two versions of what is given the followers, and then there's a private version of Scientology that he's using for himself, or what. But he was doing some of the things. He was practicing the techniques that he was given to other people himself, and it's plausible, at least, to say that he at some point bought into his description of what reality is and the world is and how it all works, even though simultaneously he was obviously selling this to other people as just a way to make money, as a way to get power and so forth. And it was obviously kind of hallucinatory, meaning like illusory, a thing that you're a reality you're creating for these people. And so it's interesting to think what Putin thinks about his relationship to the realities that he's creating, and what Trump thinks. In case with Trump, it sort of seems that he doesn't intellectualize it so much. It's more of a way of playing the game that he's confident in, and it's been working for him. And yeah, and with Putin, we go back to this "there is no Putin" meme, because you can come up with different ways of how Putin might be looking at the world, from very mundane and kind of dumb and simplistic to very metaphysical and trippy and weird. And he's not giving you much of he's not nudging you one way or the other, so people can come up with ideas of what he is, and they will all be plausible on their own accord. We don't know who the guy actually is, what his thinking is like. So yeah, that I don't know what I'm trying to say. I think I'm in terms of talking about these political realities and power and these situations that we try to navigate, I think I'm lacking. I haven't heard a way of looking at power that felt useful to me right now, that felt like I can just take it and apply. Here's what I'm trying to say. I want a newspaper that would be like the psychedelic New York Times of like this vision of New York. I want to go to a place where, like, what a newspaper is, it's like, here's what's going on in the world, right? And you have the front page and you have the stories inside, and it's this document that tells you what is going on, what the situation is, what the reality is like. And there's not any outlet like that, or a presentation of the current events of the day-to-day reality, or weekly, monthly kind of basis of things happening in the world, that would feel to me like it's actually telling the story of what the human situation is. It's these realities that they're not compelling to me. They're not. I can't really believe in this, because it's either too boring, or obviously wrong, or I see the biases of the author. I only see the biases of the author. I'm not seeing a whole lot of else. It's just like my side is correct, and that's not interesting to read. And I'm not gonna be able to live in this reality, which is the whole predicate of it is just there are two sides and mine is correct. I can't work with that. And so I want something like this to exist. I'm not seeing much of it, and I guess the natural kind of outcome of that is me trying to create something like that through my own, writing and drawing and talking, I guess, to you, and just, my various creative projects. I'm not anywhere close, but that's the direction in which I'm trying to work and or play. One way of approaching this, I started talking about it earlier and didn't finish the thought, is we talked about panpsychism and John Horgan's interview about panpsychism. I wonder if I can do something, not just with that interview, but take that interview and talk to John and get his ideas on science reporting and science and these scientific ways of looking at the world. That also, it's one of his big topics, that he at one point believed that science is going to have the answers, that there's going to be a coherent, here's what the world is, here's what consciousness is, and here's why we understand it this way. But instead we have this balkanization of worldviews in science, from panpsychism to the superstring theory to the multiverse, like all of these various approaches that don't seem to be convergent, or at least that's his way of looking at things. They're not convergent. They're going in these opposite directions or multiple directions. And he concludes partly from that that science is not going to give us this description of what reality is. And so you just have many different stories, and you can you have to figure out your own way of picking one or collecting two into one or whatever, or devising your own. But what I want to do is to talk to him about all of this stuff, and maybe some particular news from the science world, maybe try to connect it somehow to politics or whatever, and just make this one issue of Psychopolitica, which would feel like you're kind of browsing through that kind of psychedelic New York Times, like metaphysical news. Like here's what we think reality is according to the latest findings in science. Yeah. Here's these different and if you, I'm not gonna make the actual thing. Like I'm not gonna run a newspaper. I'm not gonna create a media outlet. But if I can make an image of one for this one issue, that in some ways would be enough for me, because that gets at the idea that thing is possible. If that magazine existed, it would make a lot of sense and would be interesting to read, and you would unsubscribe from all this bullshit that you can't subscribe for money, instead subscribe to this thing. And it would be just the idea that this kind of way of talking about reality and current events is possible. That itself has value for me. And so that's one of the things that I have in mind now.
Your vibe is definitely working in that direction. I mean, the look of your newsletter definitely has this kind of meta vibe. It's almost like you're looking at a newspaper as represented in a graphic novel or something.
Right. I haven't thought about that particular image, but I remember loving this kind of shit I think in The Watchmen, there's something like that. Where
I need to check that out. I've heard so many good recommendations for Watchmen.
Oh, it's really good. The graphic novel was, I liked the movie too, but I read the graphic novel after I watched the movie, and I thought it was just great. And I usually, like, I don't know, I've finished maybe 2 comic books. Like that's not the medium that's not native to me, not comfortable usually. But that one was really, really, really great.
Well, hey, Nikita, this has been an amazing conversation.
Same here. Yeah. Totally unexpected for me as well. I haven't been upfront also that I was a bit high before we started. I don't know at which point and whether I've gotten totally to my sober self. And that's on top of being kind of hungover from the night before.
That's all I can hope for as an interviewer, that I can lead someone towards sobriety.
Well, yeah, but unexpected for me, because I thought we're just gonna like chat privately. But by the way, I still want to talk to you about some like practical ideas
we got a bunch of stuff
for
to talk
work.
about.